Welcome to the Whole Health Podcast,
where a functional nutritionist and a biological dentist investigate the interconnectedness of your health.
Let's get started.
Welcome back to the Whole Health Podcast. Kelly Blodgett here with
Megan Barnett.
Thank you, Megan. Megan and I were talking a few months ago, and an idea that we came up with was talking about food trends over the past 50 years. What came to my mind, so I was born in 1971, and I grew up in a household where my parents had a massive garden right adjacent to our house, and my twin brother and I spent more time tending to that garden with my parents. Point being, like, we ate tons of fresh foods. When we moved from that house to, larger home, and we didn't have a garden and things, started experiencing, like, I was probably 7 years old before I realized that ketchup didn't come in a jar with seeds,
Yeah.
Anyway, and then I fast forward and think about, like, the fast foods I got exposed to in the 80s and the trends of the 90s. So I thought it would be fun to look at kind of the food trends and, dare I say, recommendations from federal levels and things that have shifted. Because it seems to me like the food advice, granted we both are in fields where nutrition is paramount to people's wellness.
Yep.
So let's talk about it. Where do you want to start with this, Megan?
I was born in 1980, so I can provide firsthand knowledge of what it was like to grow up in the 80s in a pretty stereotypical household with stereotypical food and work through today. But I did go back and look at a couple of things because I was curious around when certain trends started prior to my time and how they've influenced where we are today with food. I read a book a while back called The Dorito Effect, which I really highly recommend to people. It was written by a journalist, but about food from the perspective of artificial flavoring. And it turns out Dorito was the first brand that ever used artificial flavoring. I thought that was interesting. And the point of the book really is talking about the neurology of our brain and how we've evolved over a very long time to associate certain nutrients, so macronutrients like fat, carbohydrate, protein, as well as all the micronutrients, so vitamins and minerals. Our brains have evolved to associate those things with certain flavors. So imagine a time before we had any artificial flavoring. If you were craving something, likely it was your brain adjusting for what you needed. That's a very different story now. And that's because we've had food trends, as I'm air quoting, from the 1950s on. Really, I guess in the 40s, but the 50s, we really started to process and package more food. And that was for convenience. There were people looking for an easier way to get dinner on the table, an easier way to pack a lunch, right? And then I believe it was in the late 1950s, if I'm remembering the book correctly, when Dorito started artificially flavoring things. And remember, we're seeing fast food pop up, but even the fast food was largely still real food, as my father will remind me. He says, if I just would have never stopped eating McDonald's, I could still be eating McDonald's. The problem is I gave it up and you can never go back. I'm like, I don't think that's true, but that's his theory. But we started artificially flavoring, and it triggers the brain to respond in a heightened way, right? And so from a commercial standpoint, it makes sense. You're going to start flavoring foods. You're going to start making foods more convenient. I thought it was funny thinking about sort of the 1950s family. Now we're going to use something that's more boxed, more canned, more bagged because it's easier. And then when you look at the 60s with food trends, it totally mimics socially what was happening in the 60s. It was like fondue. We're going to have a fondue party, It's like, okay, we're going to dip some stuff in cheese, but we get to do it together. Vegetarian came on the scene. It was not even really discussed before that. I think macrobiotics became a thing. And then we're kind of moving into the 70s with more of this sort of exotic way of eating. Now we have ethnicities. We're like, oh, we're going to do Mexican food, right? There was a time where that didn't exist. Can you imagine America without Mexican food?
No.
Do you remember when we were kids, there weren't sushi restaurants.
Right.
Like if you said to my kids, what's your favorite food? They'd say sushi.
Yes, mine as well.
Right?
Yeah.
So we've gotten more global, right? By the 70s. It's starting to sprinkle in, especially in urban settings. But you and I both know things really hit the fan in the 80s with how we screwed up nutrition because we made everything fat-free.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
Well, what I remember is like this would have been late 80s, early 90s. I mean, this is kind of funny, being college aged, going through the drive-through at a Taco Bell. And the option was, do you want like regular cheese or low-fat cheese, because fat's the enemy.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Which, if we look at Weston Price's work, that's certainly not the case. But it's a differentiator. It's a different way to sell more product, most likely.
Yeah. And I think, interestingly, we started highlighting, actually top down from medicine, certain things about nutrition that were bad. So we packaged food and processed food for ease, convenience, and palatability, right? To sell more food to people because it tastes better. But things shifted and continue to follow a trend of shifting when we started telling people medically that fat was bad.
Right.
And remember, during this process, we're also becoming more sedentary. So we're eating more highly flavored foods that have less nutrition, really, because we're processing them, and we're moving less. And this is all happening simultaneously. But then the medical establishment's like, heart disease, fat is bad. And so food companies tend to respond to consumers, and consumers tend to respond to what they're being told by whatever establishment they're listening to. So fat's bad. So we had like Snackwells. Do you remember?
Oh, I remember Snackwells.
I just remember thinking like, I can eat as many of these as I want because they're fat-free.
How about was it the Ruffles with the Olean?
Yes.
Which, when the bags comes with a warning that may cause explosive diarrhea, is probably a sign
it
that
prevented you from absorbing the fat. You could eat all the fat, but not absorb the fat. That's actually a diagnosable medical condition at this point in time we pay really close attention to. Turns out you want to absorb fat. Yeah. So that was like the 80s, right? We moved to this fat-free revolution. We were not paying any attention to sugars at that time. So low carb had not come on the scene. Mm-hmm. And we were seeing people get metabolically much more ill, which makes sense because, again, the script was like, you can kind of eat whatever you want because it's fat-free, forgetting that the brain is triggered to be satiated largely by fiber, which we've removed at this point from processing,
sure,
fat, and protein, which takes longer to digest, right? So, but we're just all carbs during this decade.
Snackwells fit the bill.
Really did fit the bill. It's no wonder I was a chubby kid. So then we moved into the 90s. That kind of kept on for a bit. And then, like, the tides turned. Like, this is so crazy. Fat is horrible for you. You're going to die. Atkins.
Oh, yeah.
And South Beach diet. Never mind. Carbs are bad for you. Now, carbs are going to kill you, because what happened is in healthcare, the pendulum swung and people were obese and had diabetes, right? And it was like, yes, heart disease, but also turns out your risk of all-cause mortality increases when you don't eat nutrient-dense food and you have no fat and lots of carbs, right? We start to see in the 80s the trend that is the pendulum constantly swinging to the extremes in food, with a lot of messaging around it to people. And we've had nothing but more and more and more messaging as, in 1996, I remember learning about the internet. So it's like, all right, then we had the internet, and then we had now our social media, so there's a lot of information around what is right for us and wrong for us and healthy and unhealthy, with very little nuance and very little midline in how we talk about food anymore. Much less, we haven't gone back to say, like, do you remember before we processed the hell out of the food, what it looked like? But to say all that, we are also living in an era where a lot of homes have two working parents. Even without 2 working parents, people are busy. So there's not a lot of, I'm going to go to the grocery store every couple of days. I'm going to buy the fresh food that's going to go bad if I don't cook it and serve it, right? It's a laborious process to do real food. Like speaking about your family, growing it's next level, right?
Right.
So we move through that generation of high fat. We're still not talking about plants at all. We're like, great, just eat bacon and cheese and meat.
Which, to be clear, because I remember seeing some friends where I'm like, wow, like you look.
What did you do?
Yeah, you look really good. What's going on? And it would be like Atkins. Or to your point, South Beach,
Yep.
I was like, what in the heck is this? Can you speak, since we're on the topic, about from a health perspective or a medical perspective, like what's happening there such that people actually were losing weight?
Yeah. So there are a few things that are happening. So as I said, fats and proteins, they take longer to digest. They trigger satiety in the brain. You tend to eat less food when you're eating protein and fat and not eating carbohydrates. Just eat less mass. And generally that will lead to fewer calories. I think I'm going to say something that's crude, and I hope nobody takes this offensively, but when I remember learning about this in school and the professor said, what do you do with a cow when you're preparing to send it to auction? You feed it grain. That's because it puts a significant amount of fat on the body right before you're going to go sell it based on dollars per pound, right? So it's very logical. And I even grew up with cows, and I remember jumping on my horse and trying to herd these cows on our property, and my dad being like, you better knock that off. Do not exercise those cows, right? Because you're trying to get them as fat as you can, but they were just on pasture. So when we think about a human, we're a mammal like a cow. If you aren't burning fuel, so back to sedentary, if you're not moving your body, the thermogenesis of burning a carbohydrate that breaks down to sugar in your body, okay, your cells don't need the fuel because you're sitting. Like I'm sitting here all day. I don't need a whole lot of carbohydrates because I don't need gasoline in the tank if I'm not going to drive the car. And so your body takes those sugars and turns them into triglycerides and packs them into fat cells. This is the way your body stores energy. Takes a carbohydrate. If you don't need it, you store it in a savings account filled with triglycerides. Now, hypothetically, later, you would not have access to carbohydrates or fuel, and you would then drive the car and your body would say, oh, that's so cool. I've got triglycerides in that fat cell over there. I just take it out. I'm going to break it down to 3 sugars and then I'm going to use it for fuel. But the problem is if you continually put those carbohydrates in without needing to move, without needing to burn it, they just keep packing up in the fat cells. So if instead of sitting down and eating a low fat, low protein, low fiber, carbohydrate rich meal, you sit down and eat bacon and cheese, you're not necessarily giving yourself the nutrition you need. You're certainly not feeding your microbiome well. You're going to be missing things, but you're not going to eat as much quantity, and your body has to work much harder to break down that fat and protein. Your body really doesn't use protein for energy. It uses fat and carbs. So the fat, yeah, you're eating energy, but man, that's hard to break down. And it keeps your blood sugar very stable. And then your body starts pulling those triglycerides that were stored out. And this is how we lose weight when we're eating this way. So it was like, awesome, right? So great because people were losing weight. But again, the pendulum had swung. So we're not having conversations around the risks around eating that way, which there are plenty. It's not a balanced way to eat, and it increases other cardiometabolic risks in some people. I remember having a patient come in. This is sort of the more extreme 2020 version of the Atkins paleo or the Atkins South Beach approach, which was the carnivore diet. But she had been told by a nutritionist out of, I believe, Australia to just eat meat with then no parameters around that. So she ate chicken breast for a whole year, and she owned a fitness facility and she was active. And she developed scurvy So as it turns out, there's not a whole lot of vitamin C in chicken breast. So if you don't have vitamin C for a year, that's scurvy. We haven't seen that for a long time, right? So we're not using, again, a lot of nuance. So we swing to that thing. That's like into the 2000s. We're still doing that. What do you remember came after that? Do you remember another violent swing?
I'm trying to think. I don't remember much in the early 2000s. I had children and started a practice.
Okay.
I remember the whole smoothie trend hitting.
Mm-hmm. So that sort of started to happen simultaneously in a different circle of people. We got into organic. Mm-hmm. Remember, we also didn't have organic in stores. Maybe like the little granola stores in the 90s. But now organic started to be a thing. People are like, wait, maybe we shouldn't put chemicals all over our food and then put it into our bodies. Gluten-free started to pop up.
Yeah.
Partially by necessity, because we were starting to see people that were having so many medical diagnoses around celiac. That was really first before we started seeing just gluten sensitivity, which tends to be pretty widespread. And you're starting to see these things pop up at health food stores. So you're moving into like the 2000s and 2010, and we have Whole Foods. Trader Joe's is spreading all over the place, which, you know, you can find some high quality, lower cost food there. This becomes a big deal. People are starting to pay attention. I want good food, but I can't afford good food. Where am I going to get my good food? So there's a little more awareness happening, and keto pops up, which is like this derivative of South Beach Atkins, except then we even restrict protein. So we're on to fat. And that's been a little bit interesting, I'll say, for me as a nutritionist, because the ketogenic diet originated much earlier in the 19th century to treat epilepsy, and it was extremely effective for that, especially for people that didn't respond to medications as they were developed. So the ketogenic diet is not easy to follow. If you've ever tried, it's not low carb. That is a whole nother realm. It is restricting carbohydrate, but also restricting proteins very significantly. So if you've ever tried to eat 2,000 calories a day where the majority of those calories are fat and you can't have a lot of protein, you are quite limited. So it's not a diet that most people are like, can't wait to do keto. And I would argue most people aren't really doing it correctly because they probably are eating more protein than they need on a medical keto diet. But guess what? You lose weight. We love losing weight.
Very counterintuitive to the 80s messaging.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, fat's going to kill you.
Yep.
Now, all fat, decrease in medical conditions.
Totally. And it's interesting, too, to see there's a body of knowledge and evidence and groupthink around fat being bad for you. And I would say there's, again, a lot of nuance to our bodies. So most of the research studies with high-fat diets are done with high-carb diets. Just think of a donut. Yes, arguably it's high-fat. Arguably it's high sugar.
Yes.
Right? So when we see our insulin goes up, which increases when you eat a carbohydrate, at the same time you're eating high levels of fat, you're lighting the house on fire. This is not sustainable. Now, this is how you get to have metabolic disease. You can have high cholesterol, plaque in your arteries, high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity. That is a donut right there. And it's why it's a donut. It's too much fuel, too much insulin, which is a growth hormone, too much inflammation. If you choose one or the other, let's just imagine whole food. Okay, we're not going to talk anything about processed food right now, but you eat a whole food, only fat-ish diet, mostly fat diet, or you eat a very high carb, low fat diet, you can make both of those work for most bodies.
Whole foods.
Whole foods.
And some of those examples might look like what?
Let's go with the low fat first, okay? So I just had a really fun conversation with Dr. Dan Chong, who we've had on the show before. Mm-hmm. He was telling me about, he's working with a patient who has diabetes, but the origin wasn't what we would have thought. I believe she was diagnosed with a genetic disease, which is not coming to my brain where you make too much mucus. It's in your lungs. Cystic fibrosis. Okay. There it comes. Okay. Cystic fibrosis. It actually affected a pancreas. And there's more mucus on the pancreas and it blocks its ability to secrete insulin. Therefore, it's this secondary diabetes. Right. Okay.
Interesting.
So we're having this conversation and he said, yeah, it's, she went on this low carb diet. She wasn't eating a lot of plants to control for her diabetes, and her blood sugar was still crazy out of control, which didn't really make sense when we were looking at it. And I said, listen, I don't know what's going to happen, but let's just do a plant-based higher carb diet, but totally whole foods and see. And it was fascinating because this kind of goes against conventional thought. So this is what she was having for her meals. She woke up in the morning and had 2 cups of berries, arugula, and balsamic. Okay? Well, kind of a lot of food, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But you would think 2 cups of berries, your blood sugar is going to spike. And then she went on to lunch and she had lentils and beans and I think sweet potatoes and greens. Okay. Again, this is a lot of fiber. It's a lot of carbs. You're going to be full, but it's a lot of carbs. And then she gets to dinner. She had a big green salad, more lentils, more beans, more berries, more balsamic. So real whole food, real plant-based, but that's pretty low protein, pretty low fat. Her blood sugar never went above 120. That's perfect blood sugar. So I said, okay, so what's going on? Because if we're trying to control for high blood sugar and you're giving this person tons of carbs, what's the argument for why it's working? Because it's working. And he said, fascinating is that when you take saturated fat out of the diet, which can block the receptors for insulin, and you challenge the body to be able to utilize those carbohydrates, your cells actually become more insulin sensitive. Okay? We talked about this in rounds because we all just, the very plant-based focused people in our clinic were like, well, it makes total sense. And those of us that don't do plant-based as often, we're like, okay, well, what's the physiology here? What's the biochemistry? But that's a way of eating that works, okay? It's whole foods. It's going to work for most people. Nothing works for everyone. Mm-hmm. This is why when the pendulum swings, it's like, oh boy, buckle up. Because for some people, it's going to work for whatever their goals are. And for some people, it's going to obliterate them. And we're going to have a bunch of health issues. Go all the way to keto, okay? So you can do vegan keto. Most people do bacon butter keto, right? But let's just not even say you're doing vegan keto, but you're doing a more healthy version of keto. So you're going to think about some of the nuts and seeds, but not all of them, because some of them actually have too many carbohydrates, like a cashew. Mm-hmm. And this, again, we're in the weeds here, right? But you're going to do some nuts and seeds. You're going to do a lot of the lower carb vegetables. You're going to do avocado. You're going to do healthy oils like flax oil and olive oil, maybe avocado oil. You're going to, you're going to have some berries. You can actually afford some berries in the ketogenic world. And then maybe you're going to have things like coconut and coconut milk. Some people, that won't work. That'll mess with them a little bit. But for others, it works. And then, yes, you can add some things in if you're doing animal products, like you're going to have some fattier meats. Again, you're paying attention to protein, so you can't go too high on your meats. You may have some fattier fish like salmon. Somebody's going to message me that I forgot some things here, but there's the realm, right? Yep. You can do it, and you can be really high fat, and you'll see that insulin drop really low, and you'll see inflammation drop, and your brain feels really good after the first few days where you're kind of experiencing keto flu. Your electrolytes drop, so you always have to be careful of that. But it can work really well. But what's the commonality here? It's real stuff, and it's actually a lot of plants, which for most people tends to work really well. But we haven't even talked about where we are now. We're in high protein land. We've got to eat a ton of protein. Make sure you have 40 grams of protein at every meal. And I'm not arguing this. Okay, I'm not arguing that protein is good for us. I'm arguing that everything in our culture becomes extreme, right? So, okay, do you need 200 grams of protein a day if you walk your dog around the block and you sit at a desk all day? Not everyone's an athlete. No, you need to look at what your body demands, okay? And your body demands different things on different days. This is why I love personalized nutrition. It's harder to teach. It's not a TikTok video, right?
I'm sure it's harder to learn too.
It's harder to learn.
For new practitioners.
Yeah, practitioners and the everyday Joe that's just trying to figure out with all this noise, how do I eat? So there's some things about protein that we know. Protein generally is not going to spike your blood sugar. There's a little argument that it does metabolize down into carbs when you don't use it, okay? But you're generally not going to see a blood sugar spike, so that's good. It's not fuel. It doesn't energize you. It's not used by your body for energy. So I think that's a big thing people need to know, okay? You get energy from carbs and fat. Protein is there to rebuild the tissues of your body, to make enzymes, to make muscle, to make, everything's made of protein in your body. So you need it. It's a building block. It's like a Lego, okay? And if it comes down to it, your body can use protein, but it's its last source of energy when you don't have other stuff available to it. But it stabilizes things. So the anti-protein people, they get like really upset when you say, eat 150 grams of protein a day. Well, how many calories do you eat a day? If you eat 2,000 calories a day and you eat 150 grams of protein, okay, so for every gram of protein, 4 calories. So that'd be 600 calories. And you're eating 2,000 calories. That means 1,400 of your calories are not protein. Maybe that's right for you. I'm not a big calorie counter, but maybe that's right for you based on what your goals are, okay? But I certainly wouldn't say if you eat 2,000 calories a day that you should be eating 50 grams of protein, unless you have epilepsy, or we're treating you therapeutically with a ketogenic diet, or you're going through chemotherapy, and then maybe that is the answer. And so when we stand back from all these food trends, I think it's challenging because there's a right answer in all of them when done with whole foods for some people. And there's a wrong answer in all of them, even when done with whole foods for some people. But I have so many people that come into the clinic and they sit down and they're pretty frantic about this because, again, over communication, too much information coming in, always feeling like you're not doing it right enough. And when people get really stressed, I say, okay, what do you know about the cultures around the world that have lived the longest, healthiest lives? How many of them were keto? How many of them were vegan? How many of them were high protein? How many of them were Atkins? The answer is none. No one is swinging the pendulum in the cultures that have lived the longest. They're eating real food, often grown in their garden. I lived in Italy. Those women were shaking olives out of their trees at 90 years old on a ladder. No joke. They were walking up the hill to the market every day with their little pull cart behind them at 90 years old. It's real food. It's not too much of it. It's a little bit of the veggies. It's a little bit of the fruit. It's a little bit of the legumes. It's a little bit of the nuts and seeds. It's a little bit of the animal proteins. It just isn't nearly as complicated as we make it, in my opinion.
So that kind of brings me to the question of, what do you think drives the push for trends?
Capitalism. I think the other thing, because I am a certified nutrition specialist, so my whole work is around personalizing nutrition to each person. And the more we know about your body, the more we can do that. And it does change throughout life. Like the way you need to eat when you're a child is not the same when you're pregnant, is not the same when you're elderly, is not the same when you're training for a marathon versus when you're holed up in your house because your leg broke, right? It does change. And I think what we have to say is there's a tenet, there's a foundation of eating whole foods as much as you can. Eat real food. And from there, we can personalize it based on what you need. But what has happened in our culture is we've looked at people that have extreme stories, for instance, an athlete maybe, or somebody that was really sick, and how they saved themselves with food, or how they fueled themselves for an athletic event. You know, I've worked with NBA players. Dudes eat 10,000 calories a day. Can you imagine? It's like a full-time job.
That's incredible.
10,000 calories a day, but they also, they eat some real food, and they also don't. They eat junk, but their body's metabolizing at such a high level that they can tolerate it. They're also like in their 20s and 30s, right? So when we think about what saved one person or fueled another, that's not a way to make good nutrition decisions.
Yeah. Well, and one of the, speaking of trends, you know, like over the years, I haven't done this in probably a decade now, but, you know, in my 20s and 30s and 40s, I can recall going to Costco and seeing like their nutritional supplement aisle and like whatever the latest, greatest thing that had just come out, you know, vitamin E or CoQ10 or whatever. And it's just like, we're just selling the bejesus out of these things. And it's like, for what now? I mean,
right.
How did you determine that that's what would be most appropriate?
Do we need it, right?
Yeah.
And I do think we see things like, for instance, we'll have plenty of patients come in and they've been put on a statin and they're like, oh, my legs ache, I don't feel great. And I say, well, were you put on CoQ10 at the same time? Because statins deplete CoQ10, and so you really do need to supplement with this. No, I never heard of that. Like there's a context for which supplements are helpful. People ask me, what should everybody take? Well, I can't really say what everybody should take, but if I just had to throw it out and I had no way to test or assess you, I'd say high quality multivitamin, probably D3, K2, and for a lot of people, an omega-3 of some sort, because we don't get enough in our food these days. That's just, if you don't have the benefit of testing, if you don't have the benefit of finding somebody that does personalized nutrition, great, that's a good baseline. You're probably going to, it's an insurance policy, right? But even to protein powder, I think about this how did we survive as a species before we had protein powder?
Yeah.
How did you do it, Kelly?
You know, I don't know. I was a waif of a guy. Well, it is interesting. Like speaking of trends, and of course, I've got to lean into the dental perspective here a little bit. Like the idea that, well, you have to be doing fill in the blank. You know, taking fluoride supplements or even flossing. You know, like for how many millennia did humans exist without a brawn mechanical brush, yet still manage to have healthy mouths with full grown arches and teeth in the right places? It's just kind of funny because our perspective is so present. You know, like we don't think about, well, 500 years ago, the people who kept their teeth and didn't have all these things, how'd they do that? Right. You know. Now, I do want to ask a couple other trends that I've seen, that were creating significant dental sequela, shall we say. One was and they were probably around the same time. There seemed to be that there was a trend where people were doing apple cider vinegar and or lemon juice in their water to start the day. Yep. I'd seen this in many of my patients where maybe I'd been observing their oral health for say 10, 15 years, and all of a sudden somebody who had no risk for decay is suddenly experiencing root resorption and decay in places we hadn't seen. And, you know, after we go looking for the needle in the haystack, they start sharing that I'm sipping on this, and they think that they're sipping on it for a short period of time, when in actuality it might be 4 to 6 hours of acidic wash. But it's the trend. You know, they saw it on a Instagram video. And what was the genesis of that based on your recollection? I mean, I've had a lot of patients tell me even to this day that they do that. And I always say, please be careful of the enamel on your teeth. There's a wide variety of reasons. Do you remember the Master Cleanse, which was lemon, maple syrup, and cayenne, I think? I remember that integrating with the lemon in the water. I think there is a pH
conversation about that.
For sure.
Like, oh, well, we need to shift the pH of our body. And then with the apple cider vinegar, that's going strong right now. People are doing apple cider vinegar before they eat because it came onto the socials that was a way to keep blood sugar more balanced. There's a lot of ways to do that. I'm not against apple cider vinegar. Like, I'm a
tasty.
fan. Put it in
Yep.
your salad dressing.
Yep.
But sipping on acidity all day long. In fact, even Dr. Stacy, who we interviewed on this show, was talking about carbonated water and seltzers, which is another thing that I didn't even know up until fairly recently, that the pH is quite low of the seltzer water. It's logical. So I drink water. I drink lots of seltzer water because I don't really like plain water, is what I hear a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, your teeth are getting destroyed.
Yeah. I mean, there's shifting. I mean, we kind of started this talk today really about the concept of hyperpalatability, which is when you're used to Coca-Cola, let's say, and, I will admit, like, I grew up drinking soda on the daily. For me, carbonated water was a way to shift off, to off ramp and to get into drinking just water. What a concept. The other thing that I wanted to ask about, because I remember this one was huge, maybe 10 to 15 years ago, celery juicing.
Oh, yeah. I'm excited we're talking about this.
All right. Tell me where that came from and what's the scoop?
Okay. So remember that when I graduated from my graduate program, I had a teeny tiny meltdown and my family moved to Italy for the year. Okay. And then I had a little teeny tiny freak out that I couldn't practice clinically because I was in Italy. So I started ghostwriting books for doctors and writing their blogs and writing their content on their websites and everything. And they were all functional medicine doctors. I'm getting to the part about the celery juice.
Yeah, no, that's good.
And so I was writing a book for a doctor and he said, hey, can you write me a couple of articles, please? I'd like you to write one on celery juice. And if I could tell you how big my eye roll was when I got that email, and I was always so glad that I was on a big time difference because it prevented me from like the auto email back of like, find someone else. I'm not doing stupid stuff like that. So I got into PubMed and I thought, is there anything here on celery juice? And there is. It's been studied. There was a lot of, it's kind of died down a little bit, but you can still go to the juice place and get some celery juice. There's a lot of phenomenal research on what celery juice does for the body. One of the things I remember standing out to me is how it improves blood pressure. And I remember even before that learning that if you had 4 stalks of celery a day, it reduces your, I think, systolic by 10 points, something like, don't quote me on that, but it's around that range. Yeah. But there were really fascinating research studies on what it does for the gut microbiome and what it does for the mitochondria. And so I wrote that article for him, and I was a ghostwriter, so I can't put my name on it, but I have saved it because I reference back to it because the studies were so strong. Isn't that wild? Yeah. It's an expensive habit, but a little bit
time consuming.
Yeah, and time consuming. But like a lot of things, I'm really into the extremes if you're treating something. Mm-hmm. If you're treating something, go get them. Get extreme. If you're a healthy person just looking to like manage your health and your metabolism, then that's my argument here with these food trends is you don't have to be so swinging of the pendulum. But that made me think of the other thing I remember really profoundly affecting me when I moved overseas that has become a trend in our country. And it's not a food trend per se, but no one carries coffee around in Italy. You go to the cafe, you take a shot of espresso, yes. You might ask for an Americano, but it's only going to be tiny. And then you get about your day. And I remember, when did coffee drinking all day become a thing or like taking your cup with you? It was definitely within my lifetime because I was drinking the 20 ounce by the time I was 18, walking around with it for 4 to 6 hours. It must have been cold, but that also horrible for the gut, horrible for the mouth, right? And I'm not talking about black coffee. I was putting all the stuff in it.
Well, and I think there's a big difference between, to your point, having been to Italy for the first time last year, and you go in and you get the espresso, and you just enjoy it, takes a minute, and you sit there and talk and whatever, and then you move on about your day. That's an entirely different version of, air quotes, coffee,
right?
Versus your venti, quad or hex pump,
Yeah.
vanilla caramel, you fill in the blank, sugar bomb, that you're absolutely right. Like people do, in fact, sip, sip, sip. I mean, I don't see this in my practice now because of the people that we attract based on, the kind of care that we're providing. But boy, oh boy, the first 15 to 20 years of my practice, where it was a very, general practice, man, people are sipping on that stuff all day. Not as a non-nutritionist, I can't fathom what that's doing to their blood sugar all day long.
Well, and that's the other thing that's been interesting about this phenomenon we're in now, where it's like either people want to be high fat or they want to be low carb or something like that. Waking up and having a 12 ounce, a 16 ounce, and a 20 ounce, now they have 20, 30 ounce.
Jeez.
Anything that you add sugar to is just as bad as the 80s low fat, Snackwell revolution, right? Because there's no nutritional value to that. Right. Arguably, if you have put milk in it, and I would argue it's not worth it, right? There might be a little nutritional value, but really, if you were going to go put 700 calories in your body, make it count for more than that, right? Like, get some vitamins, get some minerals, get some polyphenols, get some fiber. And that's what I would say. The one trend I'm pretty stoked on these
fiber.
days, the one trend I'm really glad people are talking about, and a lot of people are talking about it, not, in the world. And it goes back to eating real food, is when we started processing, we took the fiber out of foods. When we made food fast, we took the fiber out of foods. Fiber is a very sparkly nutrient because it doesn't have any calories. It makes you feel full. It helps your body detox. It helps you eliminate. It feeds your microbiome. Yeah, I think fiber actually deserves its day in the spotlight, and I'm glad that it's getting it, because whatever you decide you want to do with your nutrition, you should be eating real whole foods and you should be eating fiber. It has a soluble and insoluble, both have a very strong role in how we stay healthy and well throughout our lives. Trust me, I'm going to get feedback on this from the carnivore people and the keto people, but it just does.
Don't forget the fruitarians.
And the fruitarians.
Yep. Well, thank you, Megan. I know this is not the last time we're going to talk about nutrition trends or fiber. God bless your fluorosophy. I use that every morning. I truly do. It's awesome stuff. Thank you for your expertise. You are a wealth of knowledge and research. I'm always impressed by how well read and studied you are. And thank you for the message of whole foods, my friends. Whole foods. It absolutely, I know it takes time. I mean, my wife and I are busy as you and your husband are. And, it does take time, but gosh, when we take the time on a Sunday to prep, real egg bakes and, real salads and things that we can go to and grab during the week when we're seeing patients and busy, it really makes a difference.
Yeah,
if we feel better, sleep better.
It's all the things that we have a lot of excuses for why we can't do certain things, and we are busy, and there's a lot of reasons, but we do what we prioritize, and eating real whole food at its foundation, is the basis of health. But it's been fun to look through the food trends. A wild ride so far.
Yeah.
And we will continue to see it. I mean, we're out of macronutrients, so I don't know what we're going to go to next. We've done carbs, fat, proteins, and fiber. So
yeah, we'll see.
Your guess is as good as mine.
I'm sure we'll cover it when it shows up.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Megan. This has been fun. And thanks, everybody, for listening to the Whole Health Podcast.
We'll see you next time. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Whole Health Podcast.
If you enjoyed what you heard today, please follow us on social media and wherever you listen to podcasts.
You can find out more about us at thewholehealthpodcast.com.
You can find me on my website, blodgettdentalcare.com.
And you can find me at bioloungepdx.com or learn more about my organic soluble fiber supplement, Fluorosophy, at thinkfluorosophy.com.
We look forward to seeing you next time.